presentation today is Big Data Rising to the Sea Level. And I've got a distinguished panel here with me today. And I'll kind of go left to right here. Or actually from my left over the far left. Immediately to my left is Doug from Splunk. Next to him, we have Kirk from Cloudera. Next to him, we have Rand from GoodData. And finally, we have Joel from Alpine Labs, who's a substitute for Bruno, who was originally going to be here. And myself, I'm Tom Plunkett. I'm with Oracle, and I also volunteer for a nonprofit called Atrocity Watch. Now, for each of our speakers, what we're going to do is we'll do a brief intro for each of the speakers, and then we'll do a few questions posed by the moderator, and then we'll open up the questions to people on the floor. And we'll ask you to line up at the microphone and ask any burning questions you have for our panel of distinguished speakers. So to begin with, I'd ask Doug to give his introduction.
Hi. Okay. So I'm Doug. I'm the CIO at Splunk. I've been there for about 3.5 years. And I don't know if everybody knows who Splunk is, but the term Splunk came from spelunking. And our founders 8 years ago, a little more than that now, 9, 10 years ago, when they went to build Splunk, the problem they were trying to solve is that systems in the data center were all giving off machine data, event log data every day, and every second of every day, saying what was happening with those machines. And if something went down in the data center, the great way to find out what was going on was to go look at that log data and figure out where the errors were. So they wanted to make an engine to put all of that data in and then analyze it. And over the years, what's happened is there's a lot of data in the world, people started to call big data now for a few years, that can be put in this type of engine and analyzed, even though it's not relational data that we're all used to from the 90s with our BI systems. And so now to this point, Splunk's become this sort of general purpose engine for any kind of data that's sort of not relational data, but it's data about machines and about transactions that are happening around us. So it's used in hospitals, it's used in businesses. Hitachi used it to manage elevators. There's all kinds of things you can do. We were built about the same time as Hadoop, so when Yahoo and others were contributing to the Hadoop project, which was hanging off of Apache, and would do this kind of thing with web logs, people visiting websites, we were being built to do data centers and do our analysis in real time. So I came there about 3 years ago, and I had been a CIO before, and mostly I had thrown all this kind of data away, like most of us. All the data coming off our systems and our websites, that was all this sort of clickstream data, we generally just tossed it to fill up servers and things. And what I've learned since coming there as a CIO is that regardless of how you approach this world of big data or machine data, however you categorize data and workload, that we have a tremendous opportunity. Because in my career over the last 10 years, we've been moving things to cloud solutions. IT has been still focused on architecture and integration and things, and still aiding the business in how to use those tools. But more and more of my business partners are doing their own BI work. When you buy Oracle today, financials, you get an incredible BI tool with it. When you buy Salesforce, you get this BI tool. We as CIOs now have this opportunity with all the other data in our businesses to do some really cool things and get a lot of value back to the business. And that's sort of what I've learned the last few years on this topic.
Great. Good morning. My name is Kirk Dunn. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at Cloudera. Cloudera was founded about 6 years ago to commercialize Hadoop. As he just mentioned, was germinated out of social networking organizations, and the founders of the company thought, rightly so at this point looking back, that traditional enterprise companies would need a new data management platform to handle all the data like Splunk data. Matter of fact, we're a partner with Splunk. They have a product runs in our engine called Hunk. It's a good marketing name there. I like that. And so, yeah. And so, anyway, so that's what we do.
I'm Rand Riker. I'm the SVP of Services for GoodData. GoodData is an end-to-end BI platform in the cloud. And we were started about the same time frame. We were started about 7 years ago. Some of the things we initially started out very much focused on helping business users, often C-level, with data visualization and publication. So as part of that, it was very much a rapid time to value from a traditional BI project. One of the rising tide that we've been involved with is as data moves to the cloud, traditional BI becomes actually less agile. It's very expensive for traditional BI projects to integrate something like the Facebook data feeds, the Facebook APIs with an internal system. A cloud system doesn't have that challenge, and it can be very agile with that. So one of the first enablers for us was the CMO who really needed to see social data alongside point of sale data. And this is a value proposition we offer to a lot of our customers. From there, though, I would say the strength is publication, a full BI kit on data from Salesforce, from Marketo. But from there, we have publication, but then IT began to see a huge value in what we were doing. The general trend is that IT, what the C-level wants to do is free up IT for higher value type of endeavors. It doesn't make sense for to Doug's point, you can get great built-in BI now. IT doesn't have to spend a lot of time creating visualizations. If there's a visualization that you want to create that you can't find, that's great, but you shouldn't have to create all the visualizations for the business. I would say that as we extend on that, though, once we're in the realm of IT, governance became very important. And while initially our BI stack 3 or 4 years ago was very focused on structured data, on delivering classic IT and analysis on the cloud, we quickly saw the need for both warehousing and actual big data stores. And so now we offer a complete end-to-end. We have Hadoop, we have Vertica, so we're really platform as a service for all your data. And this is what we use to enable an enterprise data portal. So just like you put your files and store them in a box, when your organizations are having a lot of success taking your data and storing it on
Hi, I'm Joel Horowitz from Alpine Data Labs. I'm heading up the products and marketing group there. Alpine was actually incubated from Greenplum Technologies in the old days by their data science group. So I like to say, Alpine was built by data scientists for data scientists early on. Before, I guess, Harvard Business Review recognized it as the sexiest job around. And so now that it's emerging and it's growing, we've actually added more collaborative functionality and capabilities to the product most recently. Excuse me. So we're really going after this set of individuals who historically have been doing the analysis kind of in a siloed or solo kind of endeavor. We're already seeing this emerging in a lot of different areas, both in the business as well as in individual contributors and startups in this matter. So we're really excited to be here. We're seeing some really amazing things, and what we see is that when people collaborate, especially when they're non-technical or they come from different backgrounds, they may not know statistics, they may not know R, they may not know SQL, they may not know Hadoop, but you get these folks into one room, good things happen. So that's basically what we're up to.
Thanks, Joe, and all of the panelists for your introductions. Since I'm the moderator, I'll do my introduction last. As I mentioned earlier, I'm with Oracle, but everyone's heard of Oracle, so I'm not really going to talk about Oracle during my introduction. Instead, I'd like to talk about a nonprofit organization I work with called Atrocity Watch. Atrocity Watch works with humanitarian aid organizations in the United Nations to monitor social media data to identify early indicators of genocide and other types of humanitarian issues in the developing world, in particular Africa and the Middle East. And we're using big data technologies to do that, including some of the products that our panel members are talking about. In fact, Cloudera is hosting our humanitarian hackathon at their offices on Page Mill Road in June. So with that, having done my introduction, let's start with our first question for our panelists. And I'll Atrocity Watch has recently decided to add a chief data officer to our organization. So I'd like to ask the panelists what they're seeing in terms of chief data officers and where the lines of responsibilities differ between the chief data officer and the CIOs and the CTOs. And I guess we'll just start with Dunn.
Sure. I may, we were talking before the panel, I may represent a semi-traditional view on this one. The size of companies that I've been in most recently in the Valley have not been the billion-dollar-plus companies. Of course, Atrocity Watch isn't there. But what I've been in is more mid-market type companies that are under $1 billion. And we're sometimes lucky to, or not lucky to have a CIO, however you look at that. And so when I look at the challenge for the CIO is to be the chief information officer, and arguably the term came about when BI really came to prominence, that, hey, a company needs someone that's focused on the information. We always used to say turning data into information. So whether you have a CIO, if you have a CIO who's capable of their role and they have the bandwidth and they can deliver, then I would say, you've got someone who could represent this new kind of data back to the business, back to the company. This big data that's coming off your corporate systems, off your corporate website, and increasingly off the IP-enabled devices that are around the world that are a part of what your company does, so whether healthcare or something else. Can't be the CIO. Depending on the folks that you have, though, you can imagine exactly how you can have someone focused on the data of the company and just that. There's a lot of challenges in terms of managing that data, deciding what retention periods are for this new kind of data, where you're going to keep it, how long you're going to keep it, the tools you're going to use, which ones fit where. So I can imagine, kind of both scenarios.
So what we're seeing is the evolution of the chief data officer is the cross-pollination of business. So the best example is if we take a bank, a chief information officer like Doug here, his role is to be a service provider to the constituents of the business. So in the example of banking, the CIO would have the traditional banking organization, the credit card organization, the mortgage organization, and maybe retail brokerage. A lot of these financial institutions have that. Each one of them has their own requirements of Doug, and Doug needs to satisfy that. But nowhere is there anybody that really owns the kind of cross view of the information in the organization. And a chief data officer is really the person, in many respects, as we've seen, reporting to the CEO, that is responsible for, if you're a credit card customer, why aren't you a checking account customer? Why don't we have a mortgage with you? Why don't you have a car loan? Why don't you have a retail brokerage account with us? In other words, in my bank, I could have all 5 of those, and they would see me as 5 unique customers as opposed to 1 customer. So again, traditionally the CIO has served those lines of business, but maybe serving that 1 customer 5 unique times as opposed to having 1 single view of the customer. And I think that's the unique element that, somebody like Doug in his role, he's got enough to do with dealing with the general manager of one organization who has, or believes that their needs are unique to everybody else in the world, and I just need you to solve my problems. The reality of it is that bank, that financial institution represents the entire financial institution and might have multiple business units going after 1 single customer. So the chief data officer really, instead of where the CIO is a service provider to the organization, the chief data officer comes at it from the customer's view into the bank, if you will, in this example. So I think that's fundamentally the difference. The other wrinkle on this is more and more, and Doug probably knows this more being at Splunk in the Silicon Valley than anywhere else, but more and more, people that are line of business owners are more technically savvy now than they were in years past. So most people that are general managers or SVPs of business units grew up in the information age, grew up using technology, can write their own SQL queries, don't need, in some cases, matter of fact, in some cases they actually see IT as the barrier to getting things done. And you hear that a lot. So I think this is the area where business kind of intersects the use of technology and the balance also between what the institution needs and how the customer is viewed by the institution.
Yeah, it's a great perspective, and I would echo that in terms of what we're seeing. I mean, I think the broad brush, probably don't need to point it out to this audience. Almost every business now is competing on data, at least the ones that are succeeding. This is this classic MIT study that was done, I guess now 8 or 10 years ago on relative competitiveness, but we're all competing on data, and I think CEOs understand that. So we've definitely seen a trend towards a single owner, and I really like the way you put that, the outside-in view of the organization, because the silos are just, I mean, you're not competitive when you're siloed, you're not competitive when you as an organization, as an enterprise, are enforcing your own internal limitations on a customer. Customers shouldn't see that. They give their money to one organization, and they expect that organization to talk to them as if they know who they are. More specifically about trends we see about a chief data officer, I guess I make a couple of points. One point is that I think there are CEOs. I think there's other roles that are very similar, but don't have that title. So something I see more in the retail space is an executive who's owns omnichannel. But if you parse that out, what is omnichannel? It's a governance project to tie, and it's a huge project in a lot of organizations. At the data level, what is my customer GUID? How do because if I look at something on my iPad, get out of the car, walk into the store, take out my phone, and maybe I looked at it in my lunch hour on my desktop. You need to know that that's all the same person, and that's a large project. So I think that there's many more CEOs out there. They might not just have that name. So I think that's one trend we've seen. And I think the second point I make that I find very interesting, and this relates to our own business at GoodData, we do a significant volume of our business essentially as an OEM. So, for example, if you're a Zendesk customer and you go to a higher subscription level, you get these great analytics. Those are good data analytics. They're embedded, and this is how our platform is serving, literally, up to 100,000 customers on a daily basis. So a very strong vertical for us is the agency vertical, is the digital and agency. And my analogy there, and I know it's not a good analogy, but we had the situation with telephony and cell, say 15, 20 years ago, where regions that had a poorly developed plain old telephony infrastructure were much quicker adopters of cell than say US, where we have good telephony infrastructure. I think many agencies have been delivering data to their customers, and it's often a screenshot or it's a PowerPoint embedding some standard reports out of Facebook and iTunes and the kind of campaigns that they're running. So it's a real enabler for them to be able to come to us and get an actual analysis platform that can take that data from the cloud source and republish it to their customers, to the various advertising media campaigns. And so what's very interesting is that I see lots of CEOs, actual CEOs in agencies globally, which is really large. I just appointed a CEO, I think, just over a year ago. So, I think that's a business where what they're providing their customers at the end of the day is data about their campaign spends, and they live or die by that. And that's where we've seen much more rapid creation of a CEO role. I think Doug's absolutely right. That is a good CIO is a CEO in a lot of other environments.
Excellent. Yeah, actually, I would steal a phrase from GoodData. You guys were running a campaign that was, data to dollars. I don't know the exact phrasing, but I think, when I think of a CDO and what we're seeing is actually, I'd actually say chief data, maybe monetization officer, so maybe it's CDMO. I think maybe that is part of the distinction that we're seeing, where instead of, there's this idea where you're looking at historical data and looking at historical trends and doing descriptive analytics. We're seeing a lot more, of our clients doing prescriptive analytics, and actually, how you implement this data and how you bring it into, your product or your offering or advertising or whatever it may be, I think that's why it's kind of sitting outside of the normal technology and engineering group when I look at it, and it's becoming kind of this separate organization. And I feel like we talk about the scarcity of data scientists or the scarcity of data practitioners, and I think there's kind of this need to have folks who are very familiar with these technologies, sitting closer to the business, sitting closer to maybe the product group as well, so that they can easily kind of take this data that's in its most raw form and translate that into some sort of product offering. We work with a company like Havas Media, who is working with tons of clients, and they use Alpine Data Labs because they're able to not reinvent their algorithms every time for every client. They're able to repurpose the same algorithm over and over again. Actually, we're seeing that quite a lot, not just in media, but also in healthcare. So we have a company or an organization called Iridia, who in the UK is using Chorus or Alpine Chorus as a collaborative platform for not only researchers, but also for doctors. So the idea is that they're bridging this gap, in my opinion, and they're closing the feedback loop in terms of how quickly you can take not just the insight, but actually use the data to drive an outcome. I think what I feel we're starting to emerge and move into is truly the idea of not just, again, the descriptive side, but actually using the data in your daily kind of work.
So the next question, I thought I'd start with Joel, since he just answered, since he went last in the last round of panel questions. And for this one, I'd like to kind of build on the topic we were just talking about with data scientists and the relative scarcity of data scientists and how it's the sexiest job of the year according to Harvard Business Review. So Joel, to what extent do you see the trend towards data scientists rising to the C-level?
Yeah, I think it relates to the last question for sure. I think how that emerges in the business is still to be seen. I mean, if I look at I think we all now kind of have a picture of a data scientist in our mind, and depending on the industry or the vertical that you're in, it changes, right? So when I was working for Intel, we were certainly looking at data from the manufacturing group, right? And we were applying that data to do things, and we were using statistics, and we were coding, and we were doing these things, but no one was calling us data scientists at that time. They're calling us engineers. So I think it really depends again on how that emerges within a business, and I think what the critical factor there is how it drives the business forward. I think what I can see is getting out of doing these kind of research projects and getting into sitting much closer, in my opinion, to kind of the line of business or product group or marketing group, and being far more purposeful in my mind. That's how I see kind of the growth of data science, so to speak.
I mean, I guess just to go back on the line. Yeah, I mean, there's obviously a huge opportunity there. I will say, GoodData, we have a significantly, for the size of the company, we're, I would say, significantly indexed on R&D engineering. We have a lot of amazing stuff. We actually have abstracted the database. Our data models aren't tied to a machine. We have a logical data model. We have an algebraically typed query language, so you can actually mathematically prove the validity of any result. So that's all hidden from the user. It's very powerful if you've ever, not to pick on anybody, but run a MicroStrategy query that, you went out and got lunch, you came back and you expected 7,000, and it says 72. So, is that right or not? So it's powerful to be able to prove that mathematically. That's the class of things we want to hide from our users. We have a lot of other stuff that we expose to users, and we're always looking for data scientists. I'll say that for what I see in the enterprise out there, basic governance, and basic publication often are the first priorities, in the sense of let's get data we trust, let's make sure it's being managed the way it's supposed to be managed. Somebody unfriends the company on Facebook, are we handling that? I mean, we're saving everything in Hadoop. Big question. Easier to articulate than to do. And then from the level of actual metrics, again, getting the company to agree on certain metrics and all reading that enterprise data portal so that the C-level sees one view, the next level of view, can identify anomalies, and all the way down to the regions and regional sales and so forth. So I guess what I'll say is I see huge opportunity for data science, but there's so much work involved right now in just centralizing and agreeing on data sources that, a few years ago we would go in guns blazing looking for the data scientists and talking about all the wonderful things we can do in Harr and all the rest of it. We do have takers on that, but a lot of the work we do is much more very basic, just foundational, and getting the enterprise on a single standard view of the truth in their data platform.
So I think Joel hit a point which is really important in the future of what a data scientist is versus what it has been, which is it's outcomes based. And outcomes don't always have to be predictable outcomes. For example, if you look at classic big data and data science of years past, insurance companies have been doing data science for decades. Pharmaceutical companies have been doing data science for decades. Banks, financial institutions have been doing data science for decades. Fraud is a classic data science problem. What those people are doing, though, is they've already defined what the problem is, and they're basically statisticians trying to see where the patterns are in that. They're not looking for anything new, necessarily, right? They're just trying to prove that if you put these two drugs together, statistically, you're going to have a heart attack, or something bad's going to happen. And then they learn to turn that same current year after year after year with new data. I think the data scientist of the future is more like an engineer. And it's an engineer that might be looking for uncharacteristic parallels or unnatural commonalities in data across different data types. So instead of, again, looking as a data scientist in a pharmaceutical company, getting data in about two drugs and turning the crank, you're actually going to get data in about two drugs, and then you're going to get data in from general population, then you're going to get insurance data in on outcomes, and you're going to investigate that data like a scientist would, as opposed to turning the crank on data that you've already had. And what becomes really important, the way we think about it at Cloudera when we built the data science team, was there's really three elements to a data scientist. One is mathematics, and I don't just mean statistics, I mean statistics and more advanced mathematics. The second is the ability to be kind of a teacher, trainer, because you're going to have to then take that information or that hypothesis, and you're going to have to instruct the organization, whether it's a retail organization, a bank, an airline. You're going to have to instruct the organization on what to do differently given these correlations between the data types you're looking at. And then third, this is where the engineer comes in, you're part programmer. You're actually writing and building tools, you're taking tools and customizing them, whether it's R or other things, to your environment, R, SAS, etc., Splunk for that matter. And so it really is a very different kind of a professional that we have seen in the past. Again, the past is more of a statistician, somebody that really understands statistics and statistical analysis. The future is part mathematician, part programmer, and then part teacher, because you have to take that information and let it instruct the organization so that you actually do something different.
Yeah, I think all these comments are relevant and spot on. I guess if I try to find a contrarian view to anything, I might say it all depends on the kind of project you're looking at, right? If you're in a hospital and you're trying to do the kind of correlations that were just described, there's this element of science to it. You're going to need some skills that we've known of in the past but need to be honed for the future. And back to the original point, right? For a lot of applications, for corporations, such a thing's not going to be necessary. There are a lot of uses of the data that's running around your corporation and that's coming to you from your customers, from social media, for which you're not going to need a scientist. So the only reason I say it in a contrarian moment is there is a little sort of, fear out there, like, oh, I got to go get a new kind of person to deal with this data. To a large extent, what I've seen work is the business analysts and the web developer types who have worked with systems in the past, in the relational world, have been able to make a switch, in my experience, to some of these new kinds of analytics. Now, we sold, for instance, our product to Nest, which makes thermostats that are learning thermostats that were sold to Google. They use Splunk to do that analytics. They undoubtedly had a data scientist, some of you might call a data scientist, to develop the algorithms that learn how to manage your temperature while you're gone. And there you go. But in corporations, if you're in a company and you're thinking about what other kind of data in my company could I make use of that I traditionally haven't made use of, don't be concerned to start with people already there and figure out what kind of skill sets you need. You might not need quite that. You might not need to stop your program and look for a scientist, but rather build the folks who got into it. I went to a Strata conference a couple years ago, and I was just kicking my team off internally. And before I got there, we were cobbler's children, right? Our engineers were analyzing using Splunk the downloads of our product that were coming off our website. And they were doing geolocation, where are they coming from, how long are they taking, all this kind of stuff, which was a big thing we were doing with our customers. When we started to expand it, we went to the Strata conference, and the whole focus was data science. And the really cool thing was we found authors were running around the conference who had written books years and years ago on how to represent business data properly in an expressive way with analytics. And we kind of had fun going, we got a bunch of those books, and I brought them back to my team. And I said, you need to read these books because some of this science has been around a long time, and the challenge is figuring out a lot of these things, how do you represent the data, etc. So but this view that I'm sharing is really more around, again, kind of corporate data coming off websites, social media. I think that's going to be democratized to where there's good techniques. But then the really analytical use cases, some of the guys have been talking about, yes, another kind of skill set.
Okay, thanks. For our next question, anytime a group of people get together in a room and they talk about big data, sooner or later, someone asks a question about Edward Snowden and the NSA. So my question to the panelists is, to what extent have the Snowden revelations impacted the jobs of C-level executives? I mean, obviously, on the one hand, you've got Snowden, sort of the disgruntled insider who has access to all the information in the organization. On the other hand, you have aggressive government agencies, maybe highly aggressive.
Yeah, this comes up in my company frequently, and I did have to have some humorous moments when everything was coming out on the news about Snowden, and for some numbers of weeks, there was even people on CNN who were talking about and debating. They were literally talking about the difference between the data in an email and the metadata around the email, which just had me smiling. They say, this is national TV talking about something we talk about every day. In some big data solutions, and with Cloudera, for instance, I think you can store data in files, and you can store all kinds of data like that. We're really, in our tool, it's really about the real-time use of data about data. So they were on the news talking about exactly what goes on with it. So for instance, we rigged Splunk up to all the infrastructure of the company. That was our websites, and how's our customer interacting with us, and all these things. But it included, for instance, Exchange, the email environment. And we could tell not just whether Exchange was healthy or not as a system, but also how people were using it and what was going on inside. So when you start taking logs and machine data or big data, data that's not relational database in some Microsoft SQL Server database somewhere, you take all of that, you put it in an engine like Hadoop or Splunk, you're going to see very private data, right? You will see credit card data, you'll see who's sending mail to whom. As an example, when we rigged up our app for Exchange, I implemented it inside the company. I went straight to the kind of what are people doing tab, and I pulled up the CEO, and I could see everybody he was sending email to, and I could see the subject, because the subject was metadata. And right away we said, oop, we're going to block the subject because anybody who looks at this mail thread, except for legal, shouldn't be able to see the subject. Subsequently, then I worked with legal to talk about, well, what else would you be concerned about? They didn't even like the idea that you could see who sent the email to whom. So just even who's the target recipient of mail that I'm sending, nobody shared rights to that. So these systems, when you implement them, it's really important to look at the security model of that system. How can you restrict data between different parties? And I think everything that came out with Snowden is very relevant to, in a corporate scenario or a healthcare scenario, to the kind of information you're bringing in. And it really speaks back to security models we've worked on for years, but the right sort of management of that data and making ethical decisions about what you're going to share with who.
Yeah, I think this is maybe one of the most underserved issues in big data, and will be, in my mind, I think, maybe even bigger than big data itself, in the sense that ultimately the reason why we're putting everything in these large platforms is so that you can get to a model of what is commonly known as self-service BI. Historically, in an IT structure, you'd have to go to the DBA, then structure the query, you put a BI tool, give you an answer, you take it, you make a business decision. In the not too distant future, a kind of mid-level marketing person is going to be able to do a query on the entire company's data and derive an answer and action on it very, very quickly. If that's possible, which is the whole point of doing this, then the issue of security in that data, as well as governance in the data. So security isn't just kind of blocking the data or masking the fields, as Doug was talking about. It's also, even when fields are available to somebody, being able to report on what that person did, what they queried, what they did with the result, who they sent it to, where they stored it, where it's stored, how many times have they looked at it. All those kinds of things become very, very important in the lineage of not just the data itself, but the data that are correlated and the outcomes from those queries that are run. And so what ends up happening is big data ends up generating another big data issue, which is this kind of lineage of how data is actually acted on. So no longer is this going to be a handful of people in the IT organization having access to the data. This is going to be thousands of people in an organization having access to the data at different privileges, at different rights. And so this issue of Snowden becomes very important and maybe one of the more instrumental things. At Cloudera, we spend a tremendous amount of time at both in a couple areas. Data at rest, which is where it's sitting on the disk, and then data in flight, when it's moving around, when it's being queried, when it's being copied or replicated from server to server so that it's secure, or so that you know that there's data there in the event that you have a server failure, for example. So that's one of the areas. The other area is in the area of compliance, where, for example, if you're a researcher, you're a medical researcher, you don't need to see the person's zip code, but you need to see whether it's male or female, how old they are, and what their medical condition is. If you're the insurance company, you don't need to see anything other than their social security number and their conditions so you can bill on it. You don't need to know whether they're male, whether they're female. You don't even need to know what their medical history is. You just need to know the information so you can bill on it and the company can get paid. So there's all sorts of kind of wrinkles in actually how you handle security and compliance going forward. So I think I will tell you that one of the big issues in big data, and will continue to be, will be the subject of security and compliance.
Yeah, great points. So I guess I'd answer the question in just kind of a couple of tiers of the answer, just a couple of different aspects. Very particularly, we're 100% SaaS, 100% cloud company, and Snowden has had a major impact on US-based SaaS and cloud companies. It's definitely a business consideration. Some of the very largest SaaS providers do not have data centers anymore. And obviously that's not a good operation. So that's reality for us. I think the larger, though, this is one thing that happened, and what there are going to be things like this in the future. What does it mean about what we're doing, and what does it mean about how we manage data? What's interesting is that the standpoint of, again, our value being a BI on the cloud, store your data, all your data on the cloud. For a long time, we were rolling the boulder uphill in terms of security and governance discussions around that. Actually, what the Snowden situation, I think, points out is the larger implication. For example, the example I gave earlier, according to Facebook terms and conditions, if someone unfriends you, you need to delete all of your records that you may have stored. So if you think about an environment where there's lots of, Hadoop, mini warehouses under different people's desks all across the enterprise, you're almost instantly out of compliance. I mean, maybe not, but how are you going back and retroactively deleting my posts and live events if you've got my Facebook data stream? So what that's done is it's made the centralization so much more important, because if you do have a central data platform where you can enforce and apply governance and security rules, then you can be in compliance. You can actually can be managed. So I think that's a good thing, because I think that fragmentation of data means that data isn't trusted. Centralization of data lets an enterprise really, it builds it takes a lot of work, but it builds the trust in that data. And there have been studies done that show that even C-level executives have about 40% at best trust level of the data they're using to make decisions. And that's absolutely fixable. And we get there by centralizing it. We want to get 100% trust level in the data that people are using to make decisions. The final point there is the other dynamic that I don't think is really played out yet. It's not really about Snowden, but it is about the centralization. In the past, there's somebody looking at charts, there's somebody off who looks at reports. But as we talk about moving from a system of record to a system of engagement, where data is actually part of an application stack and responding in real time, I'm going to guess that's what Nest and a lot of Splunk's other customers are doing with their Splunk data feeds. And that adds a whole other dimension to this, like Doug was pointing out, because you're talking about a real-time processing system. It raises the bar on the integrity and validity of the data in that system.
Yeah, I agree with all the points that I've mentioned thus far. I definitely see this as being a mega big data trend coming out in the next few years for sure. I kind of think about this in a couple lines of thought. One is, of course, the people. I think Edward Snowden did what he did because for whatever reason he thought he wanted to make a difference. He obviously had different views from the company he was working for. And so I think there's a people factor. I think it becomes kind of, defining the culture, of your company, and finding the right people who, are ethical and moral. I'm not saying Edward Snowden wasn't, but there's a lot of debate there. So I think one factor is the people factor, and how do you manage that? I'm not going to even begin to try and talk about that, but I think that's one major area. I think the second area, and how we deal with it, we've heard a couple ideas, compliance or centralization or decentralization. I think it's just like any system, it's only as strong as its weakest point. A good analogy is just simply, password manager, right? If you have, passwords all over the internet, I used to work for an antivirus software company, so I looked at this a lot. And you're using really secure passwords, and there's one place, or maybe your child or someone else has created a really simple password, and they get in and they can get all your information, and they have access to everything, right? So that represents. So I think it's at Alpine Data Labs, we see, and one of the big reasons that I think we get a lot of traction is the fact that we're not requiring folks to move their data. So wherever your data lives, whether it's on the cloud or whether it's on-prem, we'll connect, and we're actually sending, the analysis to the data as opposed to bringing the data to the analyst. So, if I look at an organization today, I think most of data is floating around in emails as CSV attachments or Excel workbooks or something of this nature. And so, that in itself is pretty, insecure. And then the way I see this going is, if you look at, say, like Snapchat, I think it's kind of like the Mission Impossible kind of analogy where I feel like, we'll get to a point where analysts or data scientists or data practitioners will basically get the data they need, and then hopefully it'll self-destruct after so much time. Maybe that's a startup we can talk about after. But I think that's kind of where I see this going, is you're going to need data that's like, time bombed, basically, so that it destroys itself, in my opinion. But that's where I see this going.
Okay, thanks. At this point, I'd like to open up the Q&A to the floor. So if anyone has a question they'd like to ask our distinguished panelists, please step up to the microphone.
Good morning. I'm Marie Koch. I'm talking from data. So the question that I have is, what it seems like is that we have a lot of platforms that are actually making big data more accessible to the corporations. But I'm kind of interested to find out what kinds of issues you're seeing, because many of the companies and enterprises have technology in place. So are they willing to invest and make the change and recognize the value that they can mine from their clickstream data and all the data coming in from so many different sources? And are they willing to invest? And if not, what's it going to take to get them to leverage this data?
I mean, I can tell you specifically from what we see, the answer is, unanimously yes. If you look at just one simple trend, you look at traditional data warehousing today, and one single movement is new sources of data coming in. What that's done is that's taken the analytic workloads in a data warehouse from 100% to about 40%. So 60% of the processing done in a data warehouse is just to prepare the data for analytics. So these very expensive MPP machines are being taxed just doing kind of data prep, kind of the ELT side of things, and not really running analytics. And that's fundamentally just because there's now so many more new sources of data that people want to include with their traditional sources of data. So that's just one very simple example, is merely offloading some of the data prep into a kind of a common data lake, if you would call it, or what we like to call the Enterprise Data Hub that we've coined at Cloudera. And then on top of that, you can run other analytics. And so that's a very simple area where we're seeing tremendous opportunity and tremendous cost savings. So again, the cost savings of running these ELT or ETL jobs in an Enterprise Data Hub is about 10 to 1. So you pay $1 where you paid $10 previously. So there's a significant analytic motivation to get more data in, and there's also a significant cost motivation to do things less expensively at larger scale.
I guess one thing I would just add is we do a number of POCs with folks. I mean, we go talk to IT or marketing or of course one of the functional departments in a company. We do a lot of test cases with them. We'll say, well, take some data that you think is going to mean something for you, and let's go find the needle in the haystack or show you what kind of analytics you can do off that data. That education of the market is starting to become less necessary. There's more and more senior people in IT and in business who are understanding that there are things you can do with big data or machine data in your company. But we try to tie the project to some kind of tangible benefit. In the IT scenario, it's usually mean time to resolution, lowering the amount of time it takes to find and fix a problem. In the security world, where we're used constantly, it's about identifying that sort of unknown threat that's inside the company. Somebody might have opened a file with malware. Now there's activity in the network that's not normal. It's outside normal bounds. The old tools don't catch it. This kind of thing does. So what's the cost to the company when you've had data sent back out to bad actors? And so we'll do ROI analysis based on that. And then the other thing is, I think sometimes people run in going, well, big data means I'm just going to collect all the data and throw it somewhere, and then we'll figure out what to do with it later. And I don't particularly subscribe to that. I think you need to find a purpose for what. Imagine what the purpose is going to be, what the hypothesis is, and then go through it. You don't have to figure it all out up front, so you don't have to do schemas to the point just made in the way we used to do the guide, which was just a horrendous cost. You don't have to do all that, but you should have a hypothesis and a business purpose.
just a real quick couple of things to add. Yeah, from our perspective, I mean, people are you're either competing on data or you're process going on this. You don't need to be harsh, but that's very. And I mean, like for example, I'll give an example of one of our customers. It's a company that basically used by companies like major big box retailers to coordinate on-site service and repairs. So a light goes out in Walmart, somewhere. They use this company to find a contractor to come and do that work. It is, in fact, you can't get any more bricks and mortar than that because it is the bricks and the mortar. And they use, they saw huge value in aggregating all their data, and they use it to provide price, fair price quote for a given, contractors can bid on a job, and then the platform can say, hey, is this what's a good price for this? What's an average price for this? So that's just a small example, but I'm amazed at the level of businesses coming to us. They're not technology businesses at all. They see value in aggregating their data and mirroring it back out to their customers. Second point, just a tactical one, to what Kirk said. Just what you can do now, if you have technologists with especially the Hadoop distributions, the columnar stuff that's coming into Hadoop, the distributions on Plunkett, really amazing stuff. We take billions of rows and shrink it down. The level of processing that can be done there is really amazing. I'm stunned, honestly, several times a quarter, but what my own team will bring back to me, what they're doing with that. It's an amazing thing we're living through.
I would just make one small comment. I know we have other people that want to ask questions, but I would just ask a question. Like when is data going to end up on your balance sheet, right? You have goodwill there. What is the NPV of your data, right? I think we all talk about the cost savings of doing things differently and thinking about this differently. We create, white papers and solutions that don't just say, here's the problem, here's the solution. But we also like to talk about the net new opportunities that, frankly, you just weren't able to do before, with the data or with the limited technology. The other comment I'd make is, there's plenty of research now that shows data is actually growing faster than Moore's Law, right? So if you're just, focused on using compute to keep up with data, you're going to run into a lot of trouble. So I think, there's a lot going on. I think we certainly have to think differently about this topic for sure.
So our next question.
Well, as one who does market research, I've been doing this for years, and from a security standpoint, I can just say that humans are naturally curious and always want to open the next door. So I see your panel as a panel of tool providers, and I was just wondering if you could speak briefly on corporations who do your job better than you. And I'll just bring up three that I think might be bringing something to your party, providing a learning environment for you to evolve your tools. And perhaps you could also provide examples of corporations who bring these sorts of data science best practices to your trade, so your tools can be evolved from them. The three I would think of are Dunn and Bradstreet, Procter & Gamble, and Johnson & Johnson. So if you either have experience with these three companies or can reflect on your thoughts on things that you think are notable as far as best practices, doing this before you did with older tools, and now you're bringing them newer tools, and they're actually providing you knowledge to evolve your tools with these new things.
I think there's a lot of examples. Bloomberg's an example. Premier Health is an example. Cerner's an example of analyzing, the health of the population. So these are organizations. This is the what is the data worth on your balance sheet point that Joel made. I think this has been around a long time, and so none of us up here are claiming that Dow Jones is now capable of doing what they're doing because there's a new tool. What I would say is Dow Jones and Bloomberg and Experian and et cetera are able to do things that they could never have done before because of the expansion of these tools. I would also say that certain organizations that have used data in the past, like the U.S. government, I was on a panel yesterday where the open initiatives in the U.S. government are really powerful, where they're actually making data available to corporations and to citizens to, again, kind of pollinate data they already have. And so you can take data set 1 and data set 2 and 1 + 1 = 3, right? You get more when you put data sets together. So again, this isn't about data science being new or data analytics being new or the value of data being some new kind of discovery. I think there are tools now that expand the possibilities wildly. Let me give you a really practical example that connects to the previous question. In the good old days, and my gentleman here tonight knows this really well, when you wanted to add a column to a structured database, you went to the DBA and the guy did, well, it's going to be 6 or 8 weeks and it's going to cost so much money. Now you can add that column in a matter of seconds, and you can run an outcome on that and decide whether that was worth it or not. So the marginal cost to do an additional element of query on an existing data set is 0. And when you can give that power to a Dow Jones, to an Experian, to a Bloomberg, to a Cerner, it expands their ability to generate better data faster and make more money on it. So these kinds of capabilities take what is already working well and actually expands it exponentially. It is a radical new way for them to do it. So I think companies that are data-driven like that actually are going to they're going to separate even further from the pack, and you're going to find them doing very interesting things. For example, it's well known American Express has developed a relationship with Facebook. When does a social networking company and credit card company come together? Well, it makes sense, right? Because if Joel's a really good American Express customer and Doug is his friend, chances are he's going to be a low-risk, good customer too. So we might as well connect those dots. So I think, again, these tools make data-driven organizations even more interesting and more profitable and more valuable as time goes on.
Yeah, I would just add to that. I think from what we see working in kind of the financial sector, on the East Coast, you have companies like FICO that's been around forever and have been looking at, a set of data to assign credit scores. Of course, they're starting to, take more information into account that they really couldn't add that column, before. We're also working with, a number of other wealth management companies who also are looking a lot broader at what data they want to include. So I just would, mirror what you said there.
Hi there, my name is Maggie. Telios. One of the things I've seen working in large companies is that they basically have a huge amount of data in disparate forms. They have SharePoint, Word, they have Excel, they have Mozilla, so they're doing Microsoft development, and they've got this data all over the place. And they don't really seem to have tools that allow them to integrate that data, so basically provide the APIs between the data. So it doesn't really make sense for them to map their source code into Hadoop cluster. What sort of tools do you see coming forward that CEOs are going to be requesting to improve operational outcomes?
I was just going to say, I actually would turn the question back to you, and I would say, from what I've seen, you really have two options. You can take the data as is and try to find, keys to join and do this sort of thing and kind of work within what you have. That's, I think, what 90% of the people are doing. I think the other option that I'm starting to see more of is actually adding, working with the subject matter experts. If it's Bugzilla or if it's Omniture, or if it's used Word in there, which is an interesting choice. How do you start from the outset to add, those keys from the beginning, so it makes that process, that much easier. That's what I started to see. I think there's some notable companies coming out. One's called Segment.io, was a Y Combinator, and they're creating ways, and they're managing. And I know I'm not speaking on behalf of Alpine anymore, but they're managing ways to kind of link these data sets together and doing a lot of that, work behind the scenes. So I think you're going to see more of that integration come out, either through these sorts of standardizations of how we're dealing with data formats versus trying to, wrangle it yourself.
Yeah, I think to some degree, I think things will get better. I think, for the foreseeable future, we are looking at a lot of different systems. This drives a lot of the centralization initiatives. I think one way to get in front of it, once those initiatives are coming from the top, information is characterized by discarded data, right? So I wrote you a long letter because I didn't have time to write you a short one. So you can gain economies by starting from, well, what facts does the business need from this given system, as opposed to let's extract it all. You know, so that those sorts of things can make that a more agile process. It is a lot of different data sources, and that's where the enterprise data portal becomes very strategic to unify all of that.
The only thing I guess I'd add is I've done some projects where we combine machine data or data about things that are happening in the business with the actual relational data. So looking up values, then correlating user IDs or transactional IDs between different sources so that we can get a full view of the transaction or the experience of someone in the company or a customer coming to the company. So, you know, the business has talked for a long time about single pane of glass, where you have all these different systems and you can sort of bring everything together. And, you know, I would also say you can do that with some of these tools in a way that's better than what's been done before. I don't have to prepare a data warehouse, and I can discover the linkage between data over time and build out a compelling full record of what's going on. But it's there's still a world where there's a lot of different formats for data, right? So you'll have your relational data, you have your data in Word documents and Excel documents. The best I can say is the data about all of that we've pretty well managed to put together.
So at this point, I think what we're going to do is we're going to wrap up the panel, but I'd like to ask each of our panelists to give a final answer to the basic question of big data rising at sea level. Suppose you've got 30 seconds in the elevator at sea level of a Fortune 25 corporation. What would you tell that person about big data and what they need to do?
25 seconds, okay. So you need to get on it. There's a tremendous opportunity to take data in your company that you have traditionally not been able to address with some of the new solutions on the market and new techniques for mining data, and learn a lot about your customers, about interaction with your customers, with your employees and suppliers, and about the health of what's happening in your company, about the opportunity, and you have the chance to build even a business model with data to resell basically data services based on all this information you have in the company. And it's a C-level challenge to get in front of it and inspire your teams to go after it and do something that would be at a higher order than what they might imagine on their own.
See, if I was in an elevator with a C-level person that didn't understand big data, I would get out of the elevator quickly and get in a different elevator. Because in my experience, 100% of the C-levels understand the issue of big data, and my recommendation, I guess like Doug's, would be to get on it. And typically what my kind of opening line is, if you treat it like a traditional IT project, you will fail. Because you'll get the architecture committee and the security committee and the chief security officer, everybody will get in a room and it'll be 6 months and you'll be losing valuable time. Load up a cluster, download CDH, start using big data, and yield on that will tell the rest of the story.
Yeah, I'll ride on the coattails of that comment in the sense of if they're not understanding the value of the data, that's longer than 25 seconds probably. I wouldn't anticipate that to be the case. What I would say is that I do see a lot of cost from you know, again, I don't want to come back, keep harping on governance, but the cost from untrusted data is high. So it's important to be agile. Speed to value is our number one indicator of success when we go to support a customer. With that being said, governance is incredibly important. You need a system that's end-to-end. Your solution needs to be end-to-end, open and extensible.
Yeah, I think I would ask, again, two questions. I would say, again, what is the MPV of your data? I mean, how do you really measure that? I think that's a question every CEO or every C-level executive should be asking themselves. Not just from the investment they make in the infrastructure or the platforms or the tools, but really in the data that they're collecting themselves. The second question I would say is, or I'd ask them is, why are you insulting your data? You really should be asking more from what you can do here. It's not doing aggregations and doing joins, doing filters. I mean, we've been doing that for 30 years. It's like, it's time we bring, k-means, SVN, naive-Bayes, classification, all of these types of things into the common vernacular at the sea level. I don't think it's necessary in every conversation, but I would certainly say, why aren't we using, this kind of language as well as, other business, with other business terms? I think it's a fair question to ask.
So I'd like to thank all of our panelists and all of our attendees for the audience.